Nikhil Deshpande, he's the State of Georgia Chief Digital Officer, and he is another. We've had some great visionaries here that are breaking new ground. We heard yesterday from John Rome at Arizona State University, basically creating the first voice-enabled campus in the world. Nikhil is breaking new ground in Georgia with basically bringing voice to services across the state. Preston is the Director of Research and Innovation at Acquia. They are a consulting agency that also seeks to break new ground, very innovative company, and I want to bring up now, let's give it up for Nikhil and Preston. Thank you.
Thanks. You're doing the first part?
Yeah. All righty, hi everybody, and welcome. We're here today to talk about Ask Georgia Gov and answering citizens of Georgia's questions thanks to Alexa and the Drupal CMS. But first, let's just say a few words about ourselves. My name is Preston So. I am the innovation lead at Acquia, which is the digital experience company. One of the things that I focus on quite a bit is voice technology and conversational design. And I've been giving several talks over the last few months, actually, about conversational design. And I'm joined today by my friend and colleague and dear friend of mine, Nikhil Deshpande. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how we built this, why it's so meaningful, and how you can leverage some of the knowledge that we gained in the process as well. So who is Acquia? Just to get some of the marketing slides out of the way and to get to the content. Acquia is a leading provider of cloud-based, data-driven journey technology to build, manage, and activate digital experiences at scale. We actually have offices all around the world. If you go to the next slide, we can see that we're headquartered in Boston. We actually have an office here in the tri-state area in New York City. And we also have 800 employees spread all around the world doing really incredible things with digital experiences. Acquia, you might have actually heard of Acquia in the context of the Drupal CMS, which is an open source, end-to-end content management system that is used by approximately 2% of the web and powers a lot of major brands, including folks like NBC Sports, Fox, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, NASDAQ, and of course, the state of Georgia. And I work on our innovation team, which is our lab, our small team of engineers that works on really interesting projects. So if you are interested in working on some of these more complex applications for Alexa or Google Home or for other voice interfaces, please definitely get in touch with me. If you're a Drupal developer or a CMS developer and you're interested in toying around with some of these ideas about voice technologies in the context of content management systems, we have an event coming up next month called Decoupled Drupal Days. It's going to be an incredible event with international attendees, and we're going to talk about futuristic approaches and future-proofing Drupal applications. So if you're interested in that, please do join us. We do have a lot of tickets still available. So thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Preston. I'm going to jump right in this. I'm Nikhil Deshpande. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the state of Georgia. And I'm so glad to be here, part of this first Voice Summit, along with my good friend Preston. And we have worked together on so many projects, and this is one of our keystone where we would really love to share our story with you. If you are tweeting about this talk, I would love for you all to acknowledge that I'm just happy to be here to talking about what my team has been doing. So if you want to use the @GeorgiaGov team handle, and my personal handle is Nick of the Hill, by all means, feel free to give kudos to them, because honestly, I'm so honored to be here because of their hard work. So let's talk about AskGeorgia.gov. So before that, what I do is I head the digital services team within the state of Georgia. As the Chief Digital Officer, it is my team's mission to make sure anything that the state produces, develops, invests in is citizen-centric. And without having that mindset, we know when products are designed without citizens in mind, what happens to those products. So essentially, the intent of the government wanting to help citizens, when it reaches the actual citizens, it tapers down to almost nothing when it comes to the experience piece of it. And their experience is never conveyed back to the organizations. So we are the ones who go in there and we connect those dots, or at least we do our best to do that. So having said that, we do acknowledge that at this point, a citizen has multiple ways of reaching government and interacting with government, right from the extreme left of the brick and mortar in-person office interactions to all the way to the digital assistants, right, where there is no real human involved. It is all artificial, but at the same time, there is no reason why the conversation or the transaction needs to be artificial. That is real. So how can we bridge that gap? We can all agree that at any point for any digital presence, these are all the things that are needed. So within the state, obviously, there are strategy teams, content teams, design teams. What we do is we are a central team that we work with about 85 of agencies to host their websites at this point and truly focus on content. Because honestly, content for government is the product. Content and services are truly our products. Although we don't compete with anyone else, it is really important for us to make sure that through our content, through our products, we earn our currency, which is trust for citizens. So this is what we'll be covering right now, is we'll talk about the duality of futurism and inclusion and what we are trying to do. Then I'm going to talk about what is Ask Georgia Gov. And then Preston will talk about designing for Ask Georgia Gov, the conversational content strategy, and the conversational usability aspect. Because at the end of the day, it is for the citizen, it is for the user. This is not about the technology. So the duality of futurism and inclusion, as we get more and more devices and more channels hitting us from all ends, it is important for us to make sure that we don't get swayed into the glitter and the glamour of what they offer without forgetting that there are real people who cannot have access to all of these new things. So how can we build the new things while staying us rooted in making sure that what we are offering in these new channels is also offered in some of the older channels? So this is where we really kind of started off with this project to make sure that we don't forget connecting with those citizens and with that information. And with that in mind, we always wanted to make sure that this project relied on a single source of truth for content. We did not want to duplicate content and add something else in our skill that does not match with our website, for example, or what's printed or what is offered on other channels. So we all know from a usability perspective that the users like to be in control. Anyone who is on a website, anyone who is using a mobile app, they want to be in control. They want to choose where they want to go. And that should not be any different for digital assistants. So we always had that in mind. And when we started to understand how technology development can break all kinds of norms, we wanted to stay rooted to make sure that that content piece, which is the true message, is consistent. But for that, we had to kind of go back and reinvent some of the way we created and structured our content. Because at the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that content is also accessible for any of these channels that we're talking about. So as you probably kind of see where I'm going with this, this is more than just a tech project. This is more than just a skill. And for us, content being the key, we wanted that to be the pivotal point of wherever we choose to go from also, the future perspective after we do an Alexa skill or anything else that we build on top of that. So for that, content strategy and redefine the content strategy was really important for us. Like, how can we take our web content and make that conversational? But for that, let me just kind of breeze you through our initial content strategy. Government sites are used to having just boatloads of content on pages and thousands of pages in documents. About a few years ago, we broke that. We got rid of 70% of our content on Georgia.gov because we applied the 80-20 model. We realized that 80% of the people are seeking only 20% of the content on Georgia.gov. So we decided, let's just focus on that 20%. And we broke that 20% into 50 popular topics. And these are the topics that are right up on this homepage. The most popular ones are displayed on the homepage, and then you can go to the rest of them. But other than the fact that just bubbling up these topics, what we did was we created context around that content. And for example, for a business license, you would have to deal with 3 state agencies. So instead of having to go to 3 different state websites, we kind of aggregated all that content in one place. So at least at the screen level, when it hits you with all cohesive one piece of content, it's actually not everything that just dumped on that page. Behind the scenes, you have a structure for this content. Each of these pieces are broken into and have a context around them. They're contextualized. And this is the value of having structured content. And this is not just something that helps our website, although we kind of started thinking that way, because having a structure not only helps us understand and define the content, but it really helps search engines. For us, it's different. Our success criteria is not about these many people landing on our website. Our success criteria lies in the information being relayed to people. So if people have this experience where they don't even come to GeorgiaGov, but if they're looking for something and they find that answer right on Google, it's success for us, right? But for that content strategy needs to be applied. But when we realized that digital assistants are in play, and the way we decided how we can connect and make sense of the content, we realized that that content was truly also easily available for our digital assistants. So jumping into what Ask GeorgiaGov is, Ask GeorgiaGov really is an Alexa skill that people can download and get the basic information about what they can do with the state government. It basically explains all of those 50 topics that I talked about. And from a web perspective, it's easy for us to just add another topic. For example, when we had hurricanes or some of the events that needed updated content, we just added, for a temporary basis, some new content so people could start leveraging that. So people really could be asking anything. The whole goal is to get information faster to citizens and widening that access of information, right? Like, why just hold content hostage to a website or a web page? Let's just set it free by doing the right things to make sure the content kind of has those legs and those wings to reach other channels. Having said that, we also wanted to make sure that we uphold the spirit of open source, because that is really dear to us. As Preston mentioned, they are a big player in Drupal, and the reason why we're working with them for a long time is we believe that open source helped us a lot in our web presence, and we wanted to see how that can extend towards other non-web channels. And that really kind of trickles down into our product strategy for Ask GeorgiaGov, right? So we wanted to make sure that we save people the time of having to wait through long lines of, just to get like a simple question answered. Why do that? But also, where it really helps is when we realized that our accessibility audit showed that people with, vision impaired conditions, now they are choosing to use digital assistants as opposed to having screen readers, because regardless how well a screen reader can read an entire page, it's still very robotic. It's not a very pleasurable experience. But a digital assistant does a much better job of actually conversing rather than just reading out a long verbose text. So we wanted to make sure that we meet our users where they were, and we wanted to meet all of our users, not just the one who could use all the fancy phones, but we also wanted to meet the people who really relied on some of these other channels that help them with their accessibility needs. And again, we were happy to kind of leverage our open source mindset wherever possible towards our innovation model. So extending the GeorgiaGov popular topics to Alexa really helped, because now we actually could hear all of the topics and how they were conversed rather than just having 50 pages for it. And it really kind of helped our content strategy as well. We had to go back, and Preston will talk a little detailed about how we went back and redid our content. But having each of these topics and each of these focus points really kind of helped us in making sure that Alexa can deliver this as efficiently as just any person consuming Georgia.gov. Having said that, let's just quickly look at the demo for Ask Georgia.gov, and then I'll hand it over to Preston.
So I think we have to click on this thing here. I don't know, will that trigger it? There we go. Thank you very much.
Alexa, start GeorgiaGov.
Welcome to GeorgiaGov. Feel free to ask a question.
How do I renew my driver's license?
Does this sound helpful? Getting and renew your driver's license.
Yes.
The Department of Driver Services helps you earn, renew, or replace learner's permits and licenses. To carry a full license for everyday, non-commercial vehicles, you must be at least 16 years old.
All right, so because we have such limited time, we showed a very short video of how the Ask Georgia Gov skill functions. We invite all of you to check it out and download it, try it out on your own. Even if you're not from Georgia or planning to move to Georgia, it's a really interesting exercise. Now, I want to ask the audience really quickly, how many of you here have dealt with Alexa skills or voice interfaces that handle content and information, not transactions, not purchases, not sort of checking things? Only one person? Okay. Anybody else? Writing content skills? Okay. When we think about content and we think about the ways in which, looks like this might not be working.
There's a slight delay.
There's a slight delay. One of the big reasons why we wanted to pursue this project is to really challenge the limits of what Ask Georgia Gov, what Alexa at large is capable of. We wanted to look at the fact that Alexa is really good at handling a lot of transactional skills. If you want to check your credit card balance, if you want to order a pizza, it's great. But if you want to find out where that pizza was made, or if you want to find out what sorts of credit card options are available, Alexa actually comes up with some big challenges. In her book, Conversational Design, which is one of the most foundational works in the field of conversational technology and user experience, Erica Hall comes up with 4 key moments which are crucial to delivering any conversational experience. Those are introduction, making the user feel trust in the system. Number 2 is orientation, making sure the user knows what tools they have available, what features they have available in order to get out of what they're doing or move forward. Finally, actions, meaning what options do I have at every stage of my interaction with this device, A, B, C, or D. And then finally, of course, the guidance, which is the instructions and the feedback that we want this skill to provide. One of the things that we learned over the course of this project is that there's 2 very crucial components of any conversational interface design. And that is the flow itself, which is what you see on the slide here, which demonstrates how we want to help users go back and forth and traverse this tree of different interactions with this device, but also the language. In short, we also want to make sure that any sort of interface language that we put in, any sort of help text that we put in, just like a typical form on a website, is something that is going to be understandable to a user who is listening to this device rather than actually interacting with it in a visual or physical way. And so in writing the language, we actually had to make sure that every one of these 4 key moments were represented in the process. Things like saying, "Welcome to Georgia Gov," to introduce the skill. Things like giving feedback if you don't understand what was being said, if you're actually having trouble understanding what the user said, give that feedback and ask the user to repeat. And then finally, one of the most interesting things about this skill is that we're actually not doing a direct mapping of action A to query A or action A to intent A in our Alexa skill. The Alexa skill in this case is actually conducting a search. And so this driver's licenses search here is going through and getting all of the content from the Drupal site of Georgia.gov that relates to this particular content. Now, as you can see, as we go further down the flow, more and more information comes out. And actually parceling out this information is one of the things that I think the Georgia.gov team did really well and was able to make into something that was already sort of adept for conversation or apt for conversational interfaces. Now, within these key moments, we actually have an interesting case here, which is that, as you can see, we also ask for the agency's phone number. Oftentimes, you don't get the information you need from just a simple, short, 30-second exchange with your Alexa. You might actually want to also call the agency later on and get the phone number. And what this does is it actually saves the agency time in the long run, because a lot of that initial information, a lot of that initial obstacle to getting the information they need has been resolved already. So let's talk a little bit about content strategy, because if you're working with content and you want to expose content through a conversational interface, you have to think about certain things. First and foremost is the difference between web-based and conversational content. As we know from working with websites on a daily basis, the ways in which we work with the web is very different. If you think about Wikipedia, for example, every one of those articles is linked in a million different places on the page to a million other articles. That's something that doesn't really exist in a conversational setting. And just like we can have websites that are Russian novels and we can scroll and keep on scrolling and get to the end of that 60-page web page, we can't do that so easily with a conversational interface, with a voice assistant. With Alexa, we really have to pay attention to this notion of low verbosity tolerance. The Alexa is something that we can't really listen to for too long. Otherwise, as we all know, we have to say for the Alexa to stop. So keeping this in mind, one of the things that we discovered is that information architecture in this case, the way that we help the user navigate through different states of the interface, had to be more guided and unidirectional. How many people, when they were kids, ever worked with dichotomous keys to identify trees and plants? So I've asked this question several times, and nobody raised their hand. I'm from Colorado. We do this all the time. We identify trees, but nobody else seems to do that. If you don't know what a dichotomous key is, it's a little piece of paper. And on that piece of paper are certain questions that help you to decide whether it's a coniferous or a deciduous tree, or if it's a pine or a palm, or whatever it may be. And this kind of approach actually helps to limit the amount of fatigue the user feels from the amount of decisions that they have to make, and also the number of options that are available. And so thinking about this as a metaphor for dichotomous keys helps us to limit all of the things that the users have to do with this interface, and think about what are the only two options that we want to expose to the user right now that make sense to that user at this moment. In addition, content strategy has to move away from the web. A lot of us have our content trapped in website databases and content management systems that are ancient and haven't really gotten better with age. And we have to move away from this idea that the content management system, whatever we use to house our content, is tied inextricably from the website itself. As a result, what we did with the state of Georgia is to move towards a more channel-agnostic vision, what Nikhil alluded to earlier, in terms of being able to serve users who are using a variety of different devices that might not even resemble, to a limited extent, what we use on the computer. So what does this look like from the standpoint of Ask Georgia Gov? Well, as you can see, we were really blessed by the content structure that the Georgia team had already put together. And I really want to call out folks like Rachel and Kendra, who did an amazing amount of work on making sure this was a reality. As you can see, with the Georgia.gov content, it's already structured in a relatively conversational way. We have a topic, which is the subject of the conversation. We have a What You Should Know section, which is a general introduction to that area of discussion. And then we also have FAQs that are placed below that section of text. And as you can see, because we have that question and answer already there in that structure, this actually makes our work a lot easier. Now, there's two things that we wanted to establish for this project that were extremely important and should be for anyone who's exploring exposing content through conversational interfaces. And that is that we wanted to make sure that the editorial workflow of the Georgia team was not affected in any way. As we all know, local governments oftentimes don't have the luxury of hiring 30 copywriters to write a second conversational interface. That's just not something that is realistic for us. And so we decided to make sure that editing a piece of that website content should be indistinguishable from conversational content. And in that way, we moved towards a more channel-agnostic vision. We also performed a conversational content audit. And what we did is we went through every single page and every single paragraph, every single word on the site that was going to be exposed in this conversational interface. And we said, what is it that we want Alexa to actually expose? And we looked at every link, every word, every single bullet item. And we said, there are certain things that we see in our conversational content strategy which are actually not so great for Alexa and for Google Home and for some of these other voice interfaces that we want to work with. Number one is the fact that a lot of websites require context. If you are on a page about unemployment benefits, for example, and you have multiple pieces of text on that page that refer to benefits, if you've already seen the heading unemployment benefits, you might conclude that benefits being referred to throughout the article are referring to those same benefits. But if you're talking with Alexa, you actually have no idea what benefits she might be referring to. As a result, we wanted to make sure that every single piece of content was clear and 100% disambiguated. Also, calls to action can't happen properly in a conversational setting. If you're trying to download a PDF or ask someone to read more or learn more, well, if Alexa tells me to learn more about something, I can't really do that sitting on my couch and having my computer in the next room and Alexa's right there waiting for me to respond. As a result, what we did is we tried to contextualize and interpolate some of these links so that we relied less on calls to action and link-rich text. Here's a really good example of this, where we had to take a link that just said, read more about this, which is very unhelpful to somebody who's using Alexa, and instead inserted a whole description. And this actually improved the content in the long run, because now we're exposing information that we know people need and actually want, but it's all in one place, and we're able to serve our citizens in a much better way. What about usability testing? This is a very important topic for a lot of us. And usability in the conversational setting, in a voice assistant setting, is actually a really unexplored and immature area. When we performed testing on this, and we did 2 rounds of very robust testing. Nikhil remembers this. It was a very, complicated process. We actually found that a lot of the pre-existing and foregoing paradigms for doing usability testing don't apply at all in a voice assistant world. And the reason for that is that when we're talking about usability testing in this other environment, we're talking about eye tracking, think aloud, some of these things that don't work at all in a conversational setting. As a result, we opted for retrospective probing, which allows for the entirety of the test to be uninfluenced by outside data coming in, which means that me, as a conversational user, as an interlocutor, I come in and I speak with the interface, and I have absolutely no reason to worry that other data is being put in, thanks to the specialist who's actually helping me with the test, or due to my own utterances as well. Because think aloud and concurrent probing don't actually work that well. They give us bad data. And of course, RP is a little bit of a bad situation as well, because obviously one of the big things that we know is that users' memories are often faulty. But this is the surefire best way to actually test any voice assistant that requires you to have a live conversation. What were the results? Well, first of all, let's take a look at one of the tasks, and you can see that we wanted to take people down the entirety of the flow. We wanted a user to ask about a particular kind of topic, and then dig into a question deeper down in that topic range, and then finally ask for a phone number to follow up with the agency. Now, what were the results of the first 10 months of this skill? And I want to finish off actually with a really funny story that Nikhil and I often tell. First things first is that we actually found that one of the things that oftentimes Alexa developers find is that Alexa can be a little bit unusable based on, number one, for example, the natural language processing algorithms that it uses, which might interpret words incorrectly, or also because there are certain issues with how it's actually transmitting the content and the queries and so on and so forth. But what we found is that in the first 8 months to 10 months of this skill, we actually had a roughly 80% success rate on all interactions, which is pretty high for an Alexa skill, especially one of this nature, which is informational, content-focused, and search-based. We also had 71.2 of all the interactions lead to the phone number being provided at the end and the agency being contacted. Now, the most popular keywords, as you might expect, because we all need to drive, we all have to pay our taxes, were vehicle registration, driver's licenses, and state sales tax. And just to end here, I want to tell one really interesting story, which might come as an amusing anecdote for all of you in the audience. Nikhil and I were in a meeting one day with all of the Georgia team, and one of the things that was flagged was this odd query that kept on coming up, and it kept on bouncing. There was no hit. It wasn't able to actually get to any results. And what we found is that this person was asking repeatedly, how do I renew my Lawsons? Lawsons spelled L-A-W-S-O-N-S by Alexa. But of course, for those of us who are familiar with Georgia, we know that it's just the southern drawl in Georgia that is causing someone to be interpreted as Lawsons and not license. So with that, thank you very much. We hope this was a useful presentation. Here's our contact information. If you have any questions about Ask Georgia Gov, we're more than happy to answer those. Thank you.